I'm John.
And we are pleased to have with us tonight our guest, Jeff Mudgett. Jeff, how are you doing?
Well, thank you, John and Lisa. It's a pleasure to be on Paranormal Science tonight, and I look forward to doing the interview with you both.
Good. We're very interested in your story and the book. It's a fascinating tale, and you've got a connection that we don't usually hear with these kind of stories. So we're pretty anxious to hear everything, and you kind of gave me a teaser that you have new information that we're going to be talking about too.
Yeah, that's right, and I'm looking forward to getting in as deep in the story as you'd like to, and telling you the things that are going on right now about the story, the book, and the interest that the movie people have in making a movie of the story, and then helping me with some of the expensive things that I'd like to do about digging things up and coming with facts so that the world can see that Bloodstains and what I've written is a true story indeed, and can be proven with evidence, which I find very unique in today's paranormal and history world. And I'm excited about sharing it with you tonight.
Very, very true. For those of our viewers who are not familiar with you, go ahead and give them a little rundown about your connection to the story and what we're talking about. I don't want to steal your thunder.
Sure. When I was about 40 years old, my grandfather came clean with the family that we were the direct descendants of H.H. Holmes, Herman Mudgett. He liked to go by H.H. Holmes, who was probably history's most evil man and prolific serial killer. He was the first one they gave the phrase serial killer to. He was a doctor in Chicago who built a hotel, which they later called the Murder Castle, for the World's Fair, which opened there, which was maybe one of the greatest events in world history, and millions of people visited it. And he was ready for it with a chamber of horrors basement, which led to what I think were hundreds of murders. And I hope one day through forensic science to be able to prove that number. But so when I was 40, my grandfather told the family, that's who we were the direct descendants of. And the book, Bloodstains, is about my trying to live with that knowledge, from being just a normal guy down the street to all of a sudden having this DNA, these genetics, which are hard to deny and make you look at yourself in the mirror in different ways.
It made you wonder whether you're capable of something like that, I'm sure.
Exactly, and it does make you wonder if you're capable, and we all have those rages, those impulses that all human beings do, but now all of a sudden being a chip off the old block meant something, and those impulses and instincts that I had to learn to live with differently after learning to know what the truth was.
Well, let's step back just a minute, and I've heard various stories about the murder castle, etc. Give the viewers a little bit of a description of exactly what H.H. Holmes did with the hotel to make it a perfect murder site.
Yeah, it was a factory for death. It was situated. He bought some property through crime, and I explained it in the book exactly how he came to own this property. It was at a Junction Grove where the trains from downtown Chicago would transfer to a train that went out to the lake where the World's Fair was situated, so that these thousands of young ladies who would leave their families excited about this greatest event of their lives, dressed to the nines, their family lending them all this money to make it possible. They would ride the trains from New York, from Virginia, from all over the country. They would spend the night at one of the 2 or 3 hotels that were available at the time, ready to go the next morning into the World's Fair. But unfortunately, if they caught Holmes's eye, he would give them a room on the second floor where he had engineered these rooms so that he could either asphyxiate, murder, or render unconscious these poor young ladies, where his henchmen would go up to the room and then shoot her down one of the grease chutes down to the basement, where she would land on a gurney and be strapped down. And then Holmes, straight out of Dr. Frankenstein, the real one this time, he would operate on these young ladies through engineering torture or engineering the use of their organs that he would sell around the country for different purposes. I still haven't quite come sure with how he used these chemicals that he engineered from these organs, but he did sell skeletons all over the country to medical schools. As a matter of fact, I have had 2 or 3 medical schools contact me after I wrote the book, telling me that they were removing these skeletons from their schools because they feared that they had been purchased, at the turn of the century from H.H. Holmes.
So basically, he had taken the earlier practice of grave robbing and stealing cadavers for medical schools to basically the next step.
Exactly. He took it to the next step, and his skeletons were known as the most pristine, the best there were in the world. We even have evidence of him selling skeletons at the University of London Medical School. So he moved it up, as you described it, to the next step. And this it's an amazing story, Lisa, because it's gone largely quiet for 100 years in our country. And now that, The Devil in the White City was written, Bloodstains has been written, now that Hollywood is interested in making movies about this horrible man, it's amazing that he was largely quiet, that history just ignored him. Maybe it was because Chicago and Illinois didn't want the story out about what Chicago had been involved in. Maybe the country didn't want it, but now that we're being able to describe the truth of the story and look through the evidence, that we get a new piece of evidence about him every day almost on my website or on Facebook or Twitter, so that it never stops. We learn something every day. It's a story that we need to dig into. Sorry for the terrible use of words, but we need to dig into it more and learn exactly what this was, because I think what fascinates me the most is it gives us the outer limits, the boundaries of what human being is capable of on the wrong side. And I think that's the knowledge that all of us need to know in order to decide many of the decisions our government and we have, in the law, to decide whether human beings can be saved once they commit these horrible crimes like he did or not, and that we need to just move to that next step and move on with life in our society without them.
Very interesting. Now, did he stand trial?
Oh, yeah. His trial was the O.J. Simpson trial of the century. Every newspaper was there. Obviously, there was no television. But I describe it in the book. He had probably one of the highest IQs ever recorded at the University of Michigan. Incredible intellect. He fired his lawyers and conducted his own trial so that some of the techniques he used, and I practice law in California, but some of the techniques he used are still used to teach moot court for prospective lawyers at law school. He was that brilliant. When I go over some of the transcripts from the trial, I'm amazed at how a man that never practiced law before suddenly took on the many prosecutors that were involved, and the back and forth he had with the judge was simply amazing. So that when your listeners decide if they ever do want to read my book, they're going, just that chapter alone about the trial is enough to scratch their head to wonder that how could a man who never practiced law before in his life could have been so good that these prosecutors thought that he was the best lawyer they'd ever faced in their careers.
Well, and I can appreciate that, Jeff, because I'm a lawyer by trade as well, so I can appreciate that. So do you think his motive was more monetary or more of a psychological motive?
Interesting question. I used to give my opinions to questions like that about Holmes, but quite frankly now, Lisa, his intellect was so high, I'm reluctant to do so because it's another plane, it's another echelon, and I don't think I'm capable of coming up with that, with a valuable opinion about how this man thought. But I'll tell you this, he loved money. He loved wearing the finest clothes. He loved the finest perfumes on his ladies. He had hundreds of them. He traveled to London, to Europe many times on the finest ships, first class all the time. Liquor, food, horses, anything he needed to have in his life was the best of everything. He never saved a dollar. Everything he spent as fast as he could. So he loved, yes, much of it was for monetary purposes, but it wasn't to save money up like so many of the criminals you see now that, hide their money away and dig it into a hole in the grave or in a bank. This man just loved to spend it as fast as he possibly could.
He reminds me a lot of another doctor of similar time period, Francis Tumblety, that ended up being based in St. Louis, and very similar extravagant lifestyle, etc. Actually had been convicted of murder and absconded and never served a day, etc. And something that's shared by the two is that they both have been named as suspects as Jack the Ripper various times.
Well, you bring up an interesting subject. We have, for 2 years now, I've been arguing that the possibility that Holmes was Jack the Ripper and the mystery has been solved is right before our eyes. If people would just listen to some of the evidence that I've been offering, it's hard to get the Ripperologists, the ones that are so set in ways that it has to be an Englishman. It's hard to get them to consider our evidence, but I can tell you this, Lisa, you being a past practitioner of the law, you'll appreciate this. In September, we are going to convene a grand jury, and I'm going to act as prosecutor in Philadelphia to present the evidence to a jury, and they're going to vote after I'm finished about whether we've established probable cause that Holmes should have been the number one suspect. So I got to tell you, the opportunity of my lifetime, and I'm very, very excited about it. We've been working on the presentation every day, and hopefully either you or John or Eric has the chance to be there in September in Philadelphia to take part as members of the jury.
That would be very interesting. That would be fascinating. In fact, I'd be happy to talk to you about that possibility later.
Good.
Be very pleased to. What? And I'm going to jump a little bit back and forth because a lot of our viewers are very interested in the paranormal connection with this as well. And the mansion has been called one of the most haunted places in America. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I write about this in the book, and it was a part of, I don't know whether any of you watched the History Channel show they did with me and the Murder Castle called Paranormal. The title of the show is escaping me, but it was about the Murder Castle. It was Paranormal History, I think, but it was about 4 or 5 months ago they ran it. They ran it periodically on History Channel. It's a full hour, and they took 3 film crews with me, and the post office gave us permission to go into the basement of the post office, which was built over the top of the Murder Castle in 1937. Now, when I described going down into the basement the first time, there was a basement door that was barricaded over. None of the employees at the post office used the basement. They all thought it was haunted. The custodian went down there periodically because he was required to by law because it was a federal building. But we got permission. We went down that first time, and I described descending the stairs, Lisa, and not believing in ghosts, not believing in the supernatural, having trouble, and I hope I don't offend any one of your listeners, having trouble even with God. When I came back up those stairs an hour and a half later, John, I believed in all three. And it wasn't because I saw a little girl on a tricycle in a little dress like you see in The Shining. I didn't have a ghost attack me with a knife blade, with a fancy mask, any of that stuff. But there was an absolute energy that descended on my partner and I in that basement, which was not worldly. It was supernatural. It was paranormal. So that, like I say, when we emerged back up those steps, I believe 100% now that we may not, you and I may not see it in the next 10 years. We may not see it in our lifetimes in the next 20 years. But sooner or later, someone is going to prove that that energy exists, that when we die, it just doesn't disappear. And I believe it's going to be proven at 63rd and Wallace, where the murder castle was.
Oh. My throat's killing me. I'm sorry. I'm just not
able to today. Well, I mean, what you're saying is actually makes a lot of sense to anyone who investigates, because energy is probably the universal factor in a haunting, is unexplained energy. And
I think that that's probably true, and a lot of what true orbs are just energy. I mean, they're not really paranormal, but they're energy. And a lot of times you'll run into things that feel just heavier. It's like it's almost like walking in water. So yeah, we know exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about energy.
I think the walking in water comparison is very accurate. That's very good, and that's exactly what it felt like. It also is something which decides or selects which person or which group of people it wants to touch in another group, because when the three of us went down that first time, John, two of us felt the energy. The third didn't feel anything.
Well, I'm a firm believer, and I think, and John is too, that spirit recognizes the living who are more aware of spirit.
Yeah, who are more sensitive to it, and they will come to you and pretty much drive you crazy sometimes, because they know they can talk to you.
Yeah, because sometimes it's almost as if, oh, you're aware of me, so you're a beacon for them. And so I think that's why often some people have an experience where maybe someone else in the room didn't. And I think also your experience is very typical of someone, if you haven't lived with it your entire life, that's usually what happens, is you walk into a situation that suddenly something happens to you, and you may not be able to quantify it, but you know it happened.
Google and quantify, right? We've actually had something similar happen on a tour. I had a gentleman come up to me. Everybody in the tour actually heard the footsteps, except this guy. He said, I didn't hear anything. And I think a part of that is fear, and part of that he didn't want to. But, I don't think he was singled out as not being able to hear it, or the spirit not wanting to hear it. But maybe he just didn't want to hear it. So the people that are willing to feel that and to experience what's going on, I think, spirit does have a tendency to, not attach to those people, but talk to them directly, and.
Well, and I'm wondering, Jeff, if perhaps you were more open to that kind of experience at that point in your life after learning your ancestry than maybe you would have been 20 years before. That might have been a part of it too.
I think you've hit it out of the park with that, because I've always been a left side brain, to tell you the truth. But I developed epilepsy, and as many of your listeners will know, epilepsy tends to give you a recognition of different levels of thought. Now, many neurologists will say that has to do with the condition of your brain and the illness that you're carrying around. I tend to think it makes your brain more open to receiving these types of energies than those who aren't so afflicted. And I consider it lucky that I have the condition, because when we do explore, what is true and what was just legend as far as the Holmes story is concerned, that openness that I have tends to give me a head start but with others that don't, as you say, don't feel that energy, that walking through water that I try to explain in the book.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. It's kind of like trying to explain what color feels like.
Yeah.
That's exactly true. What color feels like. Well said.
Yeah, because John and I are both sensitive, and so we do understand that.
I just
well.
cry a lot. I'm really not all that. I'm just sensitive that way.
That's just because I pinch him. But
yeah, I tend to. I'm a unicorn today, by the way, Jeff.
Okay. That's good.
We always have some sort of prop sitting around, and today happened to be a unicorn. So John's feeling extra emotional.
I feel pretty.
But we digress. Let's get a little more serious. This leads into, I think, an interesting, idea of what was your reaction to finding out this connection to H.H. Holmes?
I knew I was different. I knew my thought patterns were unique. Nothing, incredibly intellectual, but just the way I envisioned day-to-day occurrences differently from other people. I knew that my family, there were members of my family that did the same. We tended to write it off. I spend the first 2 chapters of the book trying to explain how we tended to write it off. Then when this knowledge emerged, how 2 or 3 of us said, aha, that's why, and that genetic connection, that DNA, there's something to that, because we can feel. Now I can tell you this, no one in my family went down his path. They were all good, law-abiding citizens who made the right choices, so that, and I try to explain this in the book, no matter where you come from, no matter what your DNA or your genetics, no matter what evil was responsible for why you're here today. And let's face it, the reason I'm talking to you here today on the radio is because of decisions H.H. Holmes, the most evil man who ever lived, decided. If he hadn't, I wouldn't be here. So, but my family, even despite those things, they all made the right choices. They were all good American citizens, some war heroes even. So that the book is a good opportunity for me to give listeners a lesson in understanding that, that stuff might give people a crutch, but it doesn't justify bad decisions in our lives. And I tell you what, and I think that's why I was selected to write the book.
And I think that's a great. I think that's a great message to take, because there's and as an attorney, there's such the debate of nature versus nurture, and crime running in families, etc. That I think it's good to have that counter argument out there, that instead of just making that assumption.
Yeah. No matter what your DNA is, you can change and do something else. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, we all understand the concept of right and wrong. We all do. And while we all might have an edge that we've got to smooth over in life, we know when we make the wrong decision. We know when we make the wrong decision and selection, we go the wrong way. And that's not an excuse that we get to use to justify bad things.
And I think that, and this crosses back over to the paranormal topic, that people often will make the assumption and the leap that there's a connection to something evil or inhuman, etc., to explain things. But I think this story is twofold. That not only the events that happened, but perhaps what's going on that site now is you can't just make an assumption that something is good or evil. It's a lot more complex than that.
A lot more complex. It's like I'm getting off the track a little bit here, but one of the things that we're looking to do is, and I've sent letters to the Justice Department and to President Obama, is that their decision, not theirs, but long before them, to put concrete over the site where so many innocents were murdered was just wrong without memorializing what happened there. And I've asked them to assist us in exhuming, in excavating and exhuming that site. We can do so without stopping the operations of the post office, but we need to discover the true evidence and the things that happened there, so that energy that I know exists there, that we've already talked about today, can be set free, and those innocents are allowed to proceed to where we all should have the right to do when we die. So that I haven't heard back yet, but I'm going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and that's when your listeners help purchasing the book or the audio. That's what we use the money for now, to see that those excavations occur, so that we can, once again, that's why I think I was elected to write this book, so that those 200 or 300 people can be set free from the concrete that was poured over their graves by the federal government.
Well, I think that if that's ever done, an excavation done, and there are bodies found, that would be a very interesting situation, because there's so many paranormal cases and hauntings that center on unmarked graves, disturbed graves, people who were not acknowledged when they were put to rest. That there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that those situations contribute to hauntings. It would be very interesting to see if, specifically we have this situation, and if you're able to relocate bodies and bury them, if it changes the energy and the activity in that location.
I think it will, absolutely. I don't have any doubt about that happening. Whether we can record it happening when it does, is still a question. That may require, our technology to proceed further. But I think you're going to be able to notice the fact that if we do it right, and if it's done properly, so that we do it with respect for those that perish there under the most terrible, horrible conditions a human mind is capable of even imagining. And I tried to recreate some of those in my book. This man with this horrible intellect experimented with the levels of pain that a human being, an innocent, could be put through, begging for their life while he laughed them off. This is the horror that existed at this place in Chicago that they decided to build a post office over without memorializing those poor innocents. And that's just wrong. Everyone can agree with me on that. That's just wrong. So that if we do it right, hopefully we can record that transfer of energy. Maybe not, but maybe yes. And in any event, we'll all know that we did the right thing. And that's why I believe that Attorney General Holder and President Obama will agree to do this if I explain exactly how, the money that we need, and that we won't interfere with the operations of the post office. So I'm doing my best, and like I say, the help that you give me on the show tonight, let me talk about this. Your listeners helping us with the book. Those are steps in the right direction, and you can be a part of history. That's what excites me, and hopefully excites you guys on the show, so that you step in and help me further.
Well, I'm very fascinated about the possibilities, and even if it's a matter of being able to document an absence of activity afterwards, I mean, that's a step in the right direction for showing that recognizing the deaths makes a difference on the other side.
Yes, and the other incident that we're investigating right now and asking for help with, the Smithsonian has said they will help us. We're going to, I don't know if you're familiar with the Holmes story. I described this in the book, but it was said that he was hanged after the trial, that he was executed, hung by the neck until dead. But I have information which tends to indicate that he wasn't, that his guard was hanged in his place. We know where the grave is in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. We're trying to get permission. Once again, we need federal permission to excavate the concrete that he was buried in. It's a very interesting story. I'll go into it a little bit for your listeners. But as he came down off the scaffolding, the man had money, and he had given an interview a few days before the hanging by the Hearst Corporation, the biggest news agency in the world back then. And they had paid him $6,000 for this interview. And in return, he had demanded that they bury him. As he came down, he was put into the coffin. The coffin was filled with concrete. It was dragged by a mule team to the graveyard, put into a 10-foot hole, which was then filled with concrete. So,
very odd.
Very odd, yes. Unfortunately, for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the historians argue about the time level. Anyone who was involved in the arrest, the prosecution, the trial, or the execution that irritated Holmes was either found dead or severely disabled. And this was called the Holmes curse by the New York Times newspaper, which ran it on the front page of their newspapers numerous times. Well, we started digging into, I didn't believe in it. I didn't believe in curses. I started digging backwards, thinking, what if he hadn't been the one executed? What if in that concrete there's someone else? When we researched the history of the execution, many parts of it were strange. So that now we're pretty much 100% sure when we dig that concrete up, we're going to do a DNA comparison of my tissue with what's inside that concrete. The Smithsonian is going to take possession of the remains and supervise it so that it doesn't turn into a what was the newscaster that made a joke of it, the burial excavation that gosh, the one with the mustache, I forget his name now. But
Geraldo Rivera.
There you go, Geraldo Rivera. We don't want it to turn in. We don't want it to turn into that. So that the Smithsonian said they'd step in and help us with it. They'd make sure it's verified a historical event, and we'll be able to prove that it wasn't him in that concrete at all, and that the Holmes curse was in fact him visiting these people in person for the next period of years.
How old was he when he was supposedly executed?
He was about 30. Oh, my mind's slipping tonight. I think 32 or 36. Either one is slipping my mind, but it's in the 30s.
So he wasn't that old then. So if he survived, he could have done this for quite a long time. Well,
exactly.
The victims of the curse, I mean, did they die in violent ways, or what? What kind of circumstances to lead to the idea it was a curse?
Horribly violent ways. Electrocutions, murders, gunshot, terrible, horrible ways, which tended, when you research each one, it tend to raise your interest and curiosity because of the way Holmes used to think how a joking matter it would have been murdering someone that had irritated him, and how he wanted them to suffer as most they could, realizing that they had messed with the wrong evil man. So that's another part of our story. We've researched how much the exhumation and the DNA comparison will be. I tried to get the History Channel and the Smithsonian Channel to step in and help us. It's about $100,000 to do this. So they haven't agreed yet, but we're going to keep trying to sell books to cover, because that's what I want to prove. Because you get into that, proving it wasn't him that was executed. The parts about him being Jack the Ripper, the parts about other parts of my story and Bloodstains that I haven't described to the reading public yet, become much easier when that Holmes curse is thrown out the door, and here he was, a living man with another name, visiting these people for his vengeance.
Well, and you said that the theory is that perhaps his guard was the one who was actually executed.
Yeah, and there's a whole chapter in the book about how it was possible and how Holmes made it happen with this guard, and how that guard suddenly turned up missing at the prison.
So I take it that it's not thought that the guard volunteered for this.
No. But Holmes, Lisa,
Yeah.
when you read, one of his many talents was hypnotism. He had assistants that helped him murder these innocents at the castle, which puts him at another level of other serial killers right off the bat. There's very few that have the ability to have assistants help them in their horrible endeavors. Holmes had 2 or 3 working at the hotel that made his experimentation and his torture of these innocents. I'll give you an example for your listeners.
Okay.
There was one young lady. Holmes was fascinated with longevity. He obviously wanted to learn how he could make himself live together. He knew it had to do with the hormonal science of the human female. He strapped a young lady to a gurney with racks on each end so that her arms and legs were strapped and stretched for a period of months on this rack. Medieval torture rack, but stretched. And then he impregnated her so that he could see if the child would come out longer. That's the way this man thought. That's the torture he would put his victims through, and that's how little he thought of the pain they suffered.
Wow.
So, do you when you say that?
That's in America. That's in Chicago. That's not often in Russia. That's not often Vladivostok or something Transylvanian. That's in Chicago, in America, and we've never heard of it before in America in our history books.
Well, I you may agree with this, but I find that as different similar stories that I come across, very often those monsters do go relatively unknown in history, that we tend to try to forget it as if, that was just an aberration that couldn't happen again. And so
it's true, and we tend to dust it off. But Chicago's had a long history of tending to dust off their history. I love Chicago. It's one of my favorite places in the world. But the history of Chicago through time is one of the more fascinating parts of American history altogether.
Well, when you say that you tended to almost hypnotize helpers, was this more of almost a cult phenomena, that he had that charismatic power over people?
No, he was an actual hypnotist. He had this power. As a matter of fact, when the jury was convened for the trial, the judge instructed the jury not to look into Holmes's eyes. Now imagine that. In an American court of law, the judge instructed the jury not to look into his eyes because they were worried that Holmes would have an effect on their vote.
Wow. Was there any documentation of this happening while he was in custody or anything?
In custody, there are notes. He wrote interviews. There are news reporters that refuse to go back a second time. Many like that now. The transcripts of the trial exist. I mean, you can dig those up and read those yourself. Those are not things I'm making up from my imagination.
Oh, I'm not doubting that. I was just wondering if they were able to document that he was hypnotizing people while he was in custody pending trial.
Well, that wouldn't have done him any good. It would have had to have been a secret for his plan to have worked. If they knew that he was hypnotizing guards around him, they would have removed him from his custody.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating to try to imagine a judge instructing a jury that way. A thought that's crossed my mind here is that there's usually the assumption that someone who does things like this is a psychopath or at least psychotic tendencies. But then there are cases where, clinically they say they aren't. Has there been any research or study of whether they think he was a psychopath or whether that this was just calculated on his part?
Yeah, one of the chapters in Bloodstains is about some of the doctors that interviewed him and wrote their opinions as to his psychopathic tendencies. They're interesting. They're turn of the century stuff. They're not modernized. I tend to believe that he wasn't mentally ill. The word psychopath is, as I've dug into it more and more, even not being a doctor, it's a difficult concept to lay your fingers and get a grip onto as far as what is and what isn't and what degrees and what levels are necessary before you commit crimes and evil. Now, I know Holmes had the ability and the intellect to have been a Louis Pasteur had he wanted. He could have cured disease in the human species, and he knew that. Instead, he decided he would rather have been evil, and he decided that at a very young age. He decided it without any forced actions or things occurring to him that made him an evil child. He decided. He went through both sides. He picked. And that's one of the things that I want to do in the book, to make sure everyone understood. This was a man who decided to be evil. It was a choice. He could have done the other things. And that's something we need to admit is capable, that the human species is capable of, so that we're ready for it when it occurs again. And it will. There will be another H.H. Holmes. How soon, I don't know. Maybe there is one right now we don't know about. But it will happen again, and we need to be ready for it.
Well, and I agree. I think there are definitely situations that serial killers are made by circumstances and things that happen to them, but this kind of situation is more disturbing, in my opinion. Now, there's a lot of discussion in the paranormal field about whether someone's nature while they're living affects things after death. For instance, if you're dealing with a haunting of someone that was rather evil, very violent, that those lead to more evil or violent hauntings, and often what people think might be demons or whatever. Has there been any indication that H.H. Holmes has haunted anyone after the grave?
Well, the book is about him haunting me after I learned who I was and the psychological journey that I went on, having him talk to me. Now, my neurologist will tell you that has to do with my epileptic seizures, not any hauntings. I tend to believe, because of the facts I learned during these discussions that I had, that I described in the book, things that I would not have known otherwise, that there's more to it than just a seizure, an epileptic seizure. So the question you asked is right there for you to discover too, and I tried to do my best describing. And I give my readers the choice. They can go to the neurologist side and they can say, Mr. Mudgett, was suffering an epileptic seizure, or you can accept some of my arguments to maybe believe that this energy was a haunting once I learned who I was and where I came from. So I think everyone should have their choice how they want to believe that, because when I go do signings or I go do shows or talks, I run into people that are very open, like you and John are, Lisa, to the possibility that this energy exists in the world, and then there's others that are almost violently opposed to the possibility and won't even consider that this energy exists after death. So I don't try to persuade anyone. I don't try to talk anyone into it. I just suggest that they take an open mind and take a look at my book if they have an extra couple of hours and see where they come down on that issue.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say that without getting into a religious discussion, the possibility of energy after death is something that because it would totally disrupt the religious beliefs, and that's why a lot of people are so violently against it, like you're talking. I've come across these people. I know what you're talking about, and you have to go one place or another, right? Well, that's not necessarily true. But I think that the world is, and we've talked about this on the show before, it's shifting differently to a belief structure that we are all connected through the web of life with some energy of some sort. Whether you call it God, the universe, whatever.
Or just in clinical scientific terms of that all matter is energy and you can't destroy energy.
Right.
Exactly, and Einstein described that exactly how it is and how it can't be destroyed. It's like oxygen in the atmosphere. It's like water on the earth. It doesn't go away. It just can't disappear. And I think anyone that studies some of Einstein's theories will agree with the three of us that while it's not as easy to understand as oxygen and water is, just because it's not easy to see or feel or understand doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's why at the beginning of the show I told you, I think, with a few more years, with some more technology, with a little more digging, we may be there pretty soon.
Well, I mean, when people ask us questions along those lines, the answer we often give is, 500 years ago, the world was flat, and the Earth was the center of the solar system and the universe, and if you said otherwise, you were a heretic and a lunatic. And so knowledge evolves and grows over time. So I completely agree with you there. And there's certainly, just in our own experience, there are hauntings that people have that seem to be traced to family members, and even those that were deceased decades before the person was born, that they really don't understand why there's a connection. Why is this person here with me? And so I certainly believe that's a possibility. And I find it really interesting you saying that information came to you that you had no way of knowing. I think that's fascinating. And what does that do to you when you're experiencing that?
Excellent question, Lisa, because I'm one of the lucky writers that I have right at my fingertips the graveyard in Pennsylvania, the post office in Chicago, 2 or 3 other spots that I describe in the book, that these theories that I have, these opinions with the evidence, circumstantial evidence that I put together, I'll be able to prove whether I'm right or wrong. And very few writers get that chance, historical writers like I've been given the opportunity to produce. So when we dig that concrete up, when we dig the post office up, there will be evidence there either, and it'll be just like this, Lisa, it'll be, okay, Mudgett was a goofball, let's move on to the next, or it will be, holy mackerel, he was right. Now, I know which way it's going to go when those things are done scientifically, when the forensic evidence is pulled up from that earth. So I'm one of the lucky ones that has the ability to go on a show like yours, give my opinions, and half your listeners can think I'm a goofball, that's all right. But there will come a time when I'll be able to stand up and tell the world, see, I told you, and this has to do with evidence, and we proved it 100% correct. So I'm excited. It's just a matter of a few more dollars. It's just a matter of maybe President Obama giving us a hand with the federal lands on the post office. So it'll come. We'll get there. But it's just it's an exciting thing for me to contemplate that 100%, yes or no, and we're going to get there.
And I admire you for putting yourself out there to be proven right or proven wrong. And not everyone is willing to stand up and do that publicly. And so I commend you for that. I really do.
Thank you.
If viewers are interested in more information about getting the book or finding out more information about some of these other projects that you're still working on, how can they get a hold of you or your book?
Well, I tell you, it's a great time for you to have me on the show because we have a free offer on our website we just did the digital download of my book, and we have a free sample of the digital download. The first 38 minutes, the first 18 pages of the book, so the listener gets a full chance to see if they'd like to purchase the remaining book. It's for $5.99 for the whole 13 and a half hours. It's the best value in the industry. But before then, go on and check the free sample, and make up your own mind. Now, you can get that at bloodstainsthebook.com. One word, Bloodstains the Book. Or you can put Bloodstains on Google. We're number one on the first page. But bloodstainsthebook.com. Follow the big red arrows and take a listen to the audio digital download, which is absolutely free, and make up your own mind. I think you're going to like it. We had professional actors do the readings of the words of H.H. Holmes. It's a spooky thing to turn the lights on, turn the lights off in your room late at night and listen to the words of H.H. Holmes. And I think you're going to enjoy it from an entertainment standpoint or from a historical standpoint. And then seeing that when you help us with these purchases, you're giving us a hand changing history, and we appreciate it very much.
Are there other things that people can do to help these efforts along for the excavation of the body as well as the post office?
Sure. I tell you what, if you follow the blog that's at the website, we'll be giving the details out about the grand jury that we're going to be convening in Philadelphia. Those tickets are going on sale pretty soon. There's going to be 3 separate events in Philadelphia. We just got signed up to do an event in Sydney, Australia, Utah. We're getting asked to do another grand jury, and then in Chicago. So if your listeners would like to be a part of the grand jury and listen to me present the evidence on why we think there's probable cause that H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper, I'd love for them to be a part of that and help us out with that as well. Or you can buy the print copy of the book at bloodstainsthebook.com as well, or at Amazon. Amazon sells it too.
Awesome. Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm really interested in finding out what happens with these other efforts, and the grand jury is something fascinating that I definitely want to talk to you about later. We really appreciate you coming on, and perhaps when we have a little more information as things unfold, we can have you back.
I'd love to come back on, especially after you and John listen to the audio download, and then have we can get into some of the more intricate details of Holmes and his life and what happened after that makes me believe he was never even executed. But I really want to thank you for having me on your show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for, yes, thank you very much. And we'll keep in touch and have you back on later then.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Jeff. And everyone stay tuned for Selena Rome, Closer to Death. She's got Tracy Ray Ramsey and Keith Ramsey. Tracy Ray is a psychic, and Keith is the rocker from Deep South Paranormal.
Thank you, everybody.